Hello all, welcome to another video of the Rook vs Pawns Endgames. This time I'm going to cover the drawing techniques that are at the disposal of the side with the pawns. Here the pawns are in the perfect chain that we saw before in the two previous videos, and I'm looking to the position from black perspective where the pawns go up to promote and it's black to move. This position is a draw. As you saw in the beating the engine lesson, that I suggest you see it if you want to understand better the details of the techniques we are going to learn over here. If you notice, it's not easy to trick the opponent, but it's possible. So in the beating the engine, we started with a losing position from the pawn's perspective. We started a losing position, and I was able to show you that even for the engine, the default engine from chess.com or later the Magnus bot, they were not able to win it against black. So that doesn't mean it's easy for black to save with a draw. This position is a draw, but of course I'm going to show you several tries from white to force black into a mistake. And this is my suggestion for you to become a better player. If you are playing from the perspective of the rook over here, I suggest you always try to win because the end game is not that easy and you cannot play the weaker, let's say weaker, not weaker, but the pawn side if you know a bit better about the technique. So here, first situation for black, it's black to move and already needs to make a decision. Uh, if you want, pause the video, try to find for yourself, and then come back and see if you have found that this is the correct move. Not just the correct move, the only move. Because let's start by going to the most usual mistake, going to the other side. The problem here is black is trying to control the f6 square. So the idea is not to allow the rook. So I am threatening to promote the pawn, but white also has one interesting key move over here. Again, you must pause and try to find if you want to increase your understanding of these techniques. And the move is just play to behind the pawns, looking like the pawns can be a real threat. But now, if the pawn advances, I simply give a check. When the king moves, I can take the pawn. So, not possible for black to take advantage of having controlled the f6 square. And of course, if other pawns move, like for example, let me see here, uh, let's say e3, that normally when two pawns play against the rook and the pawns are already on the sixth rank, this normally is a win for the pawns. But now again, I have this simple access to the f6 square, so I give a check. The king moves, and then I take the pawn again. Of course, if the pawn advances, I am controlling both pawns. It's not possible for black to win. Uh, what else? Okay, over here, probably just trying to come back with the king, but okay, I give a check. The king goes one side, I can go protect the pawn. If the king comes back, I simply have this move. Go. You should start to remember some small details to force the position, and this is a common move to break the resistance of the pawns. And now, whatever black does, one pawn will fall. Okay, so let's come back to the initial position, and the correct move is to go d7. Basically, the rule you should remember is the king should always stay the closest to the file of the rearest pawn. So basically, these two are the key squares where the king should stay if the rook is cutting off the king. Of course, here we should ask, okay, what happens if the king takes the pawn? Well, what happens, it's basically white is now fighting for a draw, because I will threat to promote the pawn, and if white is not careful, it will lose, because let's say, for example, if it tries to go back, then we get this situation where the pawn protects the most advanced pawn. Now, if I try, well, it's too late. Too late to save the game. Of course, I will still need to prove that queen beats rook. Masterclass again, remembering that queen versus rook that I have also here on the channel. So here there's one less resource for white to save the position. If you don't remember, I will remember it to you. It's the threatening checkmate technique. So basically, white is forced to threat checkmate. Of course, black can't go to the corner, otherwise it will be white to win. How? Giving a check. The king needs to come back, because if it goes to the corner, it's just simple. Let me show you fast. And now I am going to give a checkmate. If of course black can sacrifice the pawn, I take the pawn, then the checkmate is unavoidable. And if it comes back, of course, I will now am able to attack the f2 pawn, and at the same time threatening checkmate down here. So I will take the pawn, or I will give checkmate, and of course white is winning over here. So when here, black is forced to come back with the king to keep the position safe. And because we are threatening always checkmate on a1 or a8 with the rook, the king can go on. Of course, now can't go to the f file. Otherwise, I will check with the rook on f7 and take the pawn again. So the king needs to come back, and so we can't progress, and it's a draw using this threatening checkmate technique. Of course, white doesn't want to take the pawn, because we need to know this, but after knowing it, of course, the threat of taking the pawn is not viable for white. So black can comfortably play king d7, and when the rook tries to shuffle around, like for example going here, trying to force black into a mistake. Where is the mistake? If black goes over here, it's a mistake, because we will have again the king entrance behind the pawns and forcing the access to the f6 square, and so it's not possible anymore for black to save with a draw. But here, of course, black knows more, and so it comes back to the same square. So if you remember that staying close to the file of the raised pawn is the key for keeping the draw, you'll be safe. Of course, now white will try to go for another trick. Let's see what white will try to bring to us. White comes back. The idea is I am controlling the promotion of the promotion squares of the black pawns, and so now I am really threatening to take this pawn, forcing black to protect it. Otherwise, it will be a mistake, of course. So protecting. But notice that when we are here, we shuffle around, and the king is always going one side to the other. And sometimes, if you are not paying attention, this move can come and black may reply over here, which is a mistake, because it will be fast to grab all the pawns. So that's why we should keep playing, because human beings sometimes make mistakes, because they just get used to the same moves, and suddenly the situation changes and they are not paying attention. So here white goes back, but of course black knows that it needs to protect the pawn now. So white comes back, and again the king needs to control the access of the rook to the bottom square. So one of the moves possible is over here. Of course, going here will be again a mistake, because now we have this simple move. And if you remember from the lesson, the pawn chain, this is the perfect situation for white, because now black is forced to abandon the protection of the pawn, like for example going to the side. Then we give this intermediate check, uh, and then it will be really simple to win the game. So I'm not going to waste time over here because we saw this before. And of course, the right move is going to control the bottom squares. So here, white tries to again waste tempos to see if black can make any mistake. White comes now to a different approach. Of course, black attacks the rook, but now I go back. Of course, I need to protect the pawn. Now the threat is again to take the pawn because I won't be able to advance the other two pawns because the rook is really controlling and will take both of them if they advance. So I need to protect my pawn again. And again, the rook comes back, so I will attack the rook. The rook goes to the other side, and now a different situation. The rook is attacking the pawn, and if I don't pay attention, like for example, playing over here, I will get this simple move that it's taking the pawn with check when when I wake up, it's too late. And of course, I could take the pawn again, but maybe this is a better to show up that white is winning again. So coming back, of course, black doesn't want to lose focus, so it will play here. The idea is not to allow white to take the pawn with check, because if now a mistake is made, then I can simply promote that pawn without any possible way for white to avoid having to play a lost endgame with queen versus rook. Of course, white will not take the pawn. It will try to keep on the game for more chances for black to make mistakes. Let's see, for example, over here, what happens if it just wastes one tempo. Of course, now black may be not paying attention and again, oh, let me keep my pawn protected and fall into the same mistake that we have been talking. So here, the right move for black is to go to the other side. And there's no way white can take the pawn. So let's see, for example, if it takes with the king, well, now we have the perfect situation of two pawns on the sixth rank playing against the rook. There's no way white can avoid losing over here. Just for example, if I go here, of course I want to advance the f pawn because that gives time for white to recover. Okay, I don't want to do that. Let's see, for example, over here what happened. Okay, I just give a check, then I take and I save the game. I don't want to do that. So here, the correct technique to win the game for black is to advance the other pawn. And now there's no way black white can take two pawns, even giving away the rook. So again, we have this winning endgame for black. Okay, maybe you are getting exhausted of the lesson. So place yourself in a situation playing this over the board. That's how we get draw positions into a lost, and the more resilient player, in this situation, the white player, can really win. Because if you don't pay attention just one time, the score will shift, and that's why some players cannot play others because if mistakes aren't forced, then you need to voluntarily give them, and the player paying more attention is the one that's going to make less mistakes. So white keeps playing, of course. It won't. I forgot to show how the rook also lost here, but it's a similar situation. We simply advance the pawn, and there's no way I can protect it. So again, we have this situation. So now white, of course, tries to go to a different approach. So now white king is controlling the promotion, the advance of the f pawn, and the other pawn is being threatened, so the king just comes back. And if the rook wastes tempo, now I just keep protecting the pawn because the king is not in a situation where the rook can take the pawn with check. So again, the rook comes down. What is the correct move? Yes, we need to go down also. Just to control, of course, the rook can shuffle around. We will always be here. Now, what is the best move? Of course, we need to keep protecting the pawn because the rook is controlling the other two pawns. So we just keep protecting the pawn. So when the rook comes back, well, I'm not so worried about it. And again, I can have a draw. Here, just white gave up because it can't progress anymore. So we are basically in the starting situation. For example, if the rook comes here, it's exactly the situation where we started. So no progression was made. And after some time, we are going to repeat the position or reach the 50 move rule for a draw. So here, white can try something like this, and the simple way is just to advance the pawn, forcing white to go for the last resource of the. You must remember it is the threatening checkmate technique. It's the only way to be able to keep this on. Let's just go and see this fast. Now I give this control, just forcing this move, and then I come back and threat checkmate. Threat checkmate, threat checkmate. Here I just give a check so black can't go for that side. If you, I'm not going to lose much time to explain. If you want to review this, there's a lesson threatening checkmate for it. It's on the tags of this lesson. And here, for example, if black can try to just delay it a bit more, I can promote to a queen, but taking the queen and then coming with a pawn, we get exactly the same position. The king needs to go to one side or another, and so we have the draw. So here we already know that to draw, we need to be very paying attention to these possible squares, and when the rook goes back, we need to protect the pawn. So basically, there were many tries from white, but none of them were able to force black to make the mistake. Luckily for black. Okay, let's change the position. This is a starting position from the white perspective, so the pawns move up again, and it's a draw. It's a draw. Uh, but as you see, I don't have the perfect structure. So when I'm playing for the draw and I have the 3 pawns, the first thing I need to focus on is to create the perfect structure. And my advice here is to start with this simple move. Go with the center pawn. Now let's see what happens if the rook gives a check. Let's see this first. If it gives a check, now white needs to be careful because there's only one move to draw. If you have pay attention to my last position, this is not the same position, of course, but the right move is to go down. To go down because my idea is to place the pawn in the perfect chain, and then because the rook is cutting off the king on the 6th rank, keep controlling on the both squares, the key squares that we saw on the previous lesson. So here I just play this move. But there are other moves that I want you to be aware of because maybe you are playing the rook side and maybe white makes some mistake and maybe you can win. So one simple example is going here is a mistake because if you notice the pawns are not all protected, so I can simply attack one pawn and basically I could take the pawn, but if I bring the king, it will just make this easier. And now, for example, I lost here a bit. Okay, I can control and take all the pawns. Uh, Another possibility is for the king to go to the other side, and it's similar because I just bring the rook attacking the weak pawn, and here is even faster because, let's say, for example, I go here, then I come here, and the king is already very near to the pawns. It will control the pawns. Another mistake, very common on these positions, is to go up. Okay, this doesn't mean that black is going to have an easy win, but it's already a win for black. My suggestion is to keep the rook cutting the king as long as you can, and then go and attack one of the rear pawn. So my suggestion here to explore the mistake from white is to bring the king. Normally, white will try to give a check with the idea of building a perfect structure of pawn chain, of the defensive pawn chain. And here my move suggested is this one, because this restricts white to far less moves, and it's easier for black to force to win. Then, of course, white will try to force the perfect chain, and black is forced to make this move. So now there are not many moves. There are basically three possible moves: bringing the king over here or there, and maybe trying to advance this pawn. Because any other move from the other pawns, one will be lost, probably this one. And so let's see these three possibilities just for pedagogic aims. Here, my suggestion is to focus on this pawn. So any other move, you focus on this pawn. So when the king comes back, I'll just keep controlling the pawn. And of course, I have time to create this position that, if we saw on the pawn chain, we are getting the opposition, and now white is forced to abandon the opposition. This is a winning situation for black. Don't forget that we can't take the pawn directly. We need first to get control to the file of the most advanced pawn. So first we give a check. So when we take this, we are now able, if the pawn advances now, we are able to access the most advanced file of the pawn. And now, so this is just one possibility. If the pawn side tries to advance the pawn, then here I suggest you go down to h1 with the rook, just to maneuver to control the most far away pawn. So when the pawn advances, I just go there, forcing white to move. If it advances the pawn, I can take it with the rook. Any other pawn, I will grab one with the king, and as the king is very near to the pawns and controlling the opposition, white can't really make progression of advancing the pawn. So here probably it will move the king, and now I simply can play this nasty move. It's a very interesting move. There are others that can win, of course, but I like it very much because I keep cutting the king. So I am cutting the king. If the pawn advances, of course, I can take this one or that one and win the game. The king can't come back, so probably they will advance the most farther away pawn. But now I just attack it directly, and soon I will grab all the pawns. So this was the move where white tried to advance the pawn. Again, if you are getting tired, well, remember playing this in a game. Here, there are many ways, like for example, going with the king to e7. But again, if you remember more or less the same techniques, you just use the same. And so here, simply, if the king comes back, then I have the same situation where the king went to e4 and then came back to d4. So no need to see that. And if the king tries to threat some kind of promotion, I simply can take the pawn. And let's see, for example, if it tries to go over there, I, with much hypocrisy, I can attack the other pawn. The king is forced to come back, and then I just wait one tempo, and whatever the king does, I will control both pawns, and it will be pretty simple to win from here. I think you know that it's not a big deal anymore. And so we are in this situation where we saw how to win if white made a mistake. But of course, if white has studied well this lesson, by now it knows that going down is the key to draw the game. Of course, black will try to approach the king, we are already expecting, and as soon as possible, because we are trying to draw the game, we are going to build the perfect defensive chain for this situation. And as you can see now, we are with colors reversed exactly in the same situation as the previous position. And we have already understood what is the perfect drawing situation. This was when the rook attacked the king on the beginning. Okay, so we play this pawn and the rook attacked, and so we simply keep our nerves cold and play the best move. But what happens if the black tries to bring the king? Well, it's simply advancing the pawn. So we are going to play to reach the perfect structure. Let's see, for example, over here. And now I think you already must be aware of the techniques to keep the drawing. Let's just see one try from black. We, we now know that we need to go down. Okay, so the king can take the pawn. We saw that before. No need to go to that side. And so we keep approaching the most rearsed pawn file. And when the rook tries to come back, let's see. Okay, here the rook is trying to trick us. If we let's uh, know that we can't go to the other side, or else it will take with check. So we just go here, and then black simply can't force the position, and it's a draw. Okay, so I hope you have enjoyed all this lesson, maybe a bit longer, but the main idea is to get the techniques for drawing and at the same time see that sometimes keep playing may bring rewards if you are aware of what you are doing. Okay, see you again in another lessons. Bye bye.